move forward.
Oh, so we missed all of our banter, all of our fun banter before. We don't get
Oh,
any of
now,
that.
shh, people. Well, actually, that's very good, Rob, because people now signing on to watch the video will say, well, I wonder what I missed. Maybe I should come in real time and watch these programs. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. Exactly
All
right.
right. Well, I am happy to welcome Rob Vanella. Between Lynn and Dave McBride, Rob is here with us as our speaker tonight. He's part of the Delaware Center for Justice in a brand new position that was created probably at the end of last year. And so Rob took on this role in January. And it is to focus on issues of police reform, policy, and organizing advocacy. I know just a little bit about Rob's background. He, I believe, is part of the Highlands Bunker podcast and is a co-founder and coordinating editor of Delaware Call. And I think many of us are familiar with at least the latter, if not the former. But if you want, when you get started, Rob, if you want to just give a little bit about your background and how you
Sure.
came to this position, and then launch right into the work that's being done, with the ultimate goal of helping us figure out how we can help make police reform move forward.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. As I mentioned before we hit record, I'm really pleased to join you, and I was really happy to get the invitation. So thanks so much for that. Um, yeah, I came to this work sort of in an odd way. Um, I sort of had that experience, like, who am I? Why am I here? Um, I am a Delaware person. I grew up in Wilmington. I went to school in Wilmington. I went to the University of Delaware, but I worked professionally in banking. That probably will come as no big surprise to anyone here, for 24 and a half years. But overlapping into that, I started getting more into advocacy and activism. I started a podcast, and then I started doing that full time when we founded the Call. So over the course of about 5 years, I was able to leverage like a lot of my networks to make the sort of the podcast and the Call. I was able to get people in that were going to make it really really good, and it got some attention. And yeah, I was happy to get this opportunity to work inside of the Office of Defense Services through the Delaware Center for Justice to be able to do sort of this work full time. So that's how I sort of came to it. I have been doing it, as you said, since January, so I'm about 6 months in, and it's been a huge learning experience, and it's also been a lot of fun. I'm really energized to do it. Um, I think the way that I kind of wanted to go through some of my points is sort of in a spirit of conversation. So if anybody has any questions, if you just want to raise your hand, and we can stop at any time and answer a question or go off on a tangent if it's something that you're interested in. But the first thing I wanted to do is just give everybody a little bit of background. And it sounds like my colleague and friend Misty Siemens was joined this group last year and talked about reforming this bill called Leobor. So it was a police officer's bill of rights that actually later on, when ran about 10 years in Delaware before it had the secrecy sort of clause in it that prohibited any sort of misconduct by police to be publicized. Um, I had some time to go over those, but since Misty already spoke to them, all I can say is she did write a beautiful series for the Call last year to argue for the reform of Leobor. So I can point you all towards that, or maybe send some links to put in the comment section. But that sort of gives a background, if you read her work, about why we have sort of a special kind of police secrecy in Delaware, and why we're finding it very difficult to even have any kind of transparency to sort of figure out what we're dealing with and what direction we need to go with reform. because we can't hold anybody accountable if we don't have any insight into, um, what's working, what isn't working. And we certainly don't feel like we have that at all. So here's a few things I've been working on this year. I don't want to get too down on it, but as you probably know, the reforms that Misty was arguing for last year did not come to pass. There were what I would call modifications and alterations to some of the processes that we were asking for, but they were very minimal. No real misconduct or any reporting was going to be made public, except for in a very narrow circumstance, which, as we see this year, isn't really happening. The new committee that was engaged to take over from the last committee is still sort of working in the shadows. So we're trying to track to see sort of what kind of public hearings they're having. But, frankly, as far as I think most of us in the advocacy community are concerned, that effort last year was a failure. So we're moving forward this year to try to take next steps. I know a lot of you work in the legislature or at least understand sort of your relationship with your legislators. And I know Lynn knows this very, very well. Whenever there are alterations to any legislation that you guys are advocating for, and you notice that, sort of amendments get attached to it, or the number changes, or it gets split into two numbers, that's usually bad. It means they're watering down sort of the reform and the change that you were advocating for probably for years before that. And that's sort of what we had here. And what we agreed to do as advocates and what the legislators agreed to do last year was continue the work moving forward. We have a lot of legislators on record saying that this was a good first step last year. So we took them at their word and we tried to introduce some minor, not really even police reform, um, ways to obtain judicial records, police misconduct records in a court setting. I'll give you a little more information on that because it's actually still pending. There's a draft bill, and some of you might know about this because I believe this group endorsed the filing of this bill. Is that right, Lynn? Yes, thank you. So there is a draft bill at the legislature right now that would allow criminal defense attorneys within the criminal trial to get police misconduct records under the rules of evidence in a criminal trial. So these would not be public records, the same way other sensitive material that comes out during trial wouldn't be, like autopsy photos or something like that. But it would inject into the criminal justice system and the trial a more level playing field for the prosecution and the defense. In Delaware, actually, civil attorneys who sue particular officers or law enforcement agencies can get this material. The criminal defense attorneys cannot. So I think we felt that was pretty narrowly written, but we were not able to convince sort of enough people to get behind it. And one of the reasons was, again, we did get some legislation passed last year. So what you'll see when you're doing your advocacy is sometimes there's no appetite to go further, even though there's a lot of appetite on our end to go further, but not necessarily the legislative end. And I think that's a strategic thing that people should probably think about when they're planning their sort of their call campaigns or their days of lobbying, things like that. So that was a big thing that I worked on this year. There are a couple other pieces of legislation of note. One of them I'll note that it might come up and you'll see it, and it's a good piece of legislation, is no stop traffic violations. It's just a way to increase safety for police officers and for the public. Philadelphia already does this, and we sort of do it in places in Delaware with red light cameras. So there's no reason to have a contact with the police. Just write the person a ticket and send it off. That's something else that's in the works from a legislative standpoint. Um, Before I get into, I want to talk about some of the things that were able to be implemented with the changes that were implemented last year that I've been working on. But I can stop there and just see if there's any questions about the legislative end of some of the new stuff. Good?
Rob,
Okay.
has the second one you just described, has that one been introduced yet?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
Now there are some good sort of we would say criminal justice reforms that are still um, being considered. Repealing the death penalty law is going to be considered. We also wanted them to consider a constitutional amendment to abolish the death penalty in Delaware. That's probably not. There's some parole and probation reform that's uh, it could go either way. There's some good things in it and some bad things. So who really knows? But there are other sort of legislative things in the criminal justice realm, just not necessarily specifically for police reform. So the two things that have been implemented in the last couple of years that we've been tracking and trying to use as a way to get some insight and transparency, and then ultimately accountability, are police worn cameras, body cameras, which sort of came out of, I think, the episodes that we saw on the internet from maybe 2000 onwards. So that actually has been implemented. That's one of the things I spoke to Misty about today. And there's just again some question about how this information is going to be available to whom and under what circumstances. So that's a very tricky one. The second big reform that we're working on is a thing that was attached to House Bill 205 and 206, the measures that did pass last year, were police accountability boards. Now, this is really a mixed bag. I don't know where you all live, but there are either civilian oversight or some places called it, I think, the Police Chiefs Advisory Board. I think there's one of those in Seaford. There might also be one of those in Dover. So there were already some boards or some attempt at implementing this in other places before this legislation was passed. Once the legislation was passed, it was mandated that police departments would have to do this, all of them. But as I said, it's a mixed bag. Our best opportunity to actually get some insight into the system and use the board as a way to get the community out and engaged, as a way to prioritize community issues, and to get information that we need for transparency is in Newcastle County. Newcastle County Council passed an ordinance to create this, so it's actually legally binding as a law at what this committee can do. They've met twice now. They're just getting going, but I think that the way that the board was put together was in a very thoughtful way. So while none of these boards have subpoena power or investigatory power, this board has been put together in a way that I think will be able to come up with some information for the public and really engage the public where they are. There are other boards, for example, one that just was implemented in Eastern Sussex. This one was done sort of under the radar, so to speak. I don't think they passed an ordinance. I think the police just organized in 4 different departments, organized one police accountability board in Ocean View, Delaware. I believe it's Bethany, Ocean View, Selbyville. There's 4 departments in Eastern Sussex. And so we don't really have a lot of insight into that one. We don't really know all the people on the board as we do, say, in Newcastle County. So we are putting together what I'm calling a community working group for police reform. and this is my pitch. I tried to bury it sort of deep in this talk. But my pitch is this. Once a month, we meet at the second Wednesday at 10:30 with everyone in the community we can find that is interested in stuff like this. So we have advocates, we have public defenders, we have people from the ACLU, Lynn, of course, and others, to just stay in the know about what is happening, help us prioritize our work to figure out, what we think we can get done, but also with the community, how to the best engage the community. But we're also trying to create smaller sort of task forces in each county that, if they're interested, kind of try to go out to these police accountability boards, to their public meetings, sort of see what they're about, meet the people, see if people are coming out from the community. So I'm actually trying to develop a small army of watchers and reporters. So if anybody is interested in either doing that or just joining the group to hear what's going on, I'll have my email probably attached to this, and you can just email me and we'll put you on. The other thing that we have with that is there's always an agenda and a summary of like meeting notes afterwards. So even if you aren't able to dial in, it's sort of an odd time. It's the morning at the middle of the day on a weekday. You'll still feel like you're getting sort of some update, and you'll be able to communicate with the others that are in the group. So that's my only pitch. That's the only thing I'm selling tonight. So, where do we go from here? And this is where I wanted to kind of get into maybe more of an open discussion. When we are doing advocacy, I think sometimes, I'll put it this way. I wrote this down. It's a little bit, it means something to me because I knew the person who told it to me, Michael Brooks. He's was a public intellectual that sort of helped me set up some of the media things that I got into. And he said, you always kind of have this idea in the back of your mind as a foundation for how you approach these matters, is you need to be sort of kind and loving with individual people, but absolutely ruthless with the institutions and systems that we're dealing with. And that always sort of rang with me, especially in police reform, because I think that when people think about police reform, they think about, like, the police that came and took a report for them or came to help them when they were in an accident, or things like that. And when we talk about police reform, we're talking about the institutional concept of policing and how that is played out on a large scheme. So if we start talking about this, always my little caveat, if we start talking about this stuff, I just want everybody to know that I come into this sort of from that direction, so that people sort of know where I'm coming from. Does that make sense, everybody? Cool. Okay. So the chair of the Delaware Center for Justice Board is Deshaun Nixon. He also sits on the Newcastle County Police Accountability Board. So if you know him and you want to get some insight into that board, he's a great resource.
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
I just interject for a minute. This group is very familiar with Kim Eppeheimer because we do a lot with Friendship House.
So let me take a little aside with Kim, just so you guys, I had never met Kim, and Lynn told me when I first started inside ODS that Kim had applied to be on the Newcastle County Police Accountability Board, and that I should go meet her because she does a lot of work in Wilmington, where I'm from, and also in Newark, in the same districts as legislators we were trying to lobby. So I went and had lunch with Kim, and she is a delight. So I was so happy to meet her. I've talked to her subsequently, and then we went to the first Newcastle County Police Accountability Board meeting, and I met some people I didn't know and some people I know were there. And wouldn't you know it, the chairperson of the Newcastle County Police Accountability Board is Kim. So I was so happy because I was nudging the chief the chief defender, Kevin O'Connell, was sitting next to me, and I was nudging him. I'm like, I know her. I know who she is. So yeah, she is wonderful. She's the chair of this board. So you guys are lucky because you have a lot of insight sort of into this process with people that you've already developed a relationship with, which is probably the most important thing in any advocacy, whether it's police reform or anything, is sort of developing these relationships and rapport, so you're dealing with somebody sort of at the right level.
Let me interject because
Yes,
Kim and
please.
Kaylin Richards are going to do a program for us on Thursday night, either June 27th or one of our 2 Thursdays in July. They're working in scheduling that. So she is going to come and speak about the Police Accountability Board in Newcastle County on one of those dates.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, Kaylin and I met when she was working in policy for the DCJ. So I actually worked with her for a few months before she went over to be sort of the liaison between the Newcastle County government and the Police Accountability Board. Yeah, so that'll be very interesting. Yeah, it's actually really exciting work because as I've said to Kaylin, because of the way that this board was put together in sort of the manner that I mentioned before, um, it could be an example of many of these boards because we're going to have like this mixed bag of sort of different setups and what others can do or who is on them. But this particular board, because it's also, it's also sort of giving oversight to a very large police force in the state, could really set an example for what other ones can do. So I'm really keen. Maybe I'll even log into that one live.
I'll just interject again, though, because we keep referring to it as the state legislation does as police accountability boards.
Yes.
Because in the legislation, that's what they require now, every law enforcement jurisdiction to create these accountability boards. But they are really just advisory boards. The name is a complete misnomer because they have no ability to hold anyone accountable. As Rob already said, they have no power or authority that comes with these boards. Because of the restrictions that were legislatively created years ago and still haven't been taken down, they have no ability to get any information that the police don't choose to give to them. There is no subpoena power. They can't ask for any records or information. They are still blind to anything that is going on. The police are still investigating themselves. So it's an advisory board, but in the right structure and environment in a Newcastle County, I think they've done as much as they can to set up a friendly environment where the county executive is basically telling the chief of police, I want you to work in a cooperative way with this advisory board. So there's hopefully good things can come of it if they are willing to open up and work cooperatively together.
Yeah, I think the important thing that I've come at it at this, the angle that I'm sort of using with it is, yes, they do not have subpoena power and they don't really have any official power other than everything's public. For example, they're mandated to meet and also produce a report at the end of the year, I think, every year about, their findings about different, research they do and, maybe even suggestions or like again, this isn't binding. This isn't a binding document, but just because it's not a binding document doesn't mean you can't make demands. If the community has come out and supported this sort of the structure within the county government. So it's an interesting point that Lynn brings up, and I think maybe that's a good way to start the discussion. When you do things in public, and people are sort of like brave enough to stand up, that's half the battle. I think is sort of like turning up. I was very happy the last Newcastle County Police Accountability Board meeting. Got a venue change to the Route 9 library and out of a nondescript county building. And there was a very nice turnout of the community. I saw my friend Hanif and I signed up a couple civic associations for the community working group, which I was very happy about. Um, but yeah, a lot of it is just being able to do that work in public, because uh, the and again, I would always recommend people go back and read Misty's work on the call. Uh, the things that are kept secret, even the things that we know about, but I can't really talk about for reasons that I work with ODS, and I wouldn't. Um, the reason that they're secret is well, you have to make up your own mind. You know, when you hear the two sides and you're doing this kind of lobbying, when we talk about not having any transparency or insight into the processes of the institution, you really have to look at what the two arguments are, whether we should have it or whether we shouldn't have it, and sort of make up your mind which one makes more sense to you. Um, do you, based on what you know, do you think that there is a big groundswell of support to like try to, run bad cops out of departments, or, take everybody to jail? There really isn't. Um, there's a desire to make sure there are proper functions in place for civilian democratic oversight. That's it. Um, and the fact that um that is fought in the way that it's fought is very telling, I think. Um, this is the controversial part. When we do advocacy and activism and we have demands, whether it be a piece of legislation or something else, whatever kind of change you want to see, when you go after it, you have to understand who is your partner and who is your adversary. And again, this doesn't mean like a fight necessarily. It just means strategizing in such a way that you understand that you can potentially be being undermined or not really told everything, not necessarily lied to, but not told everything that you probably need to know. And the idea that you're not told everything you need to know is baked into the law. It's a strange situation we find ourselves in, and I think that my hope is that, and I'll go back to what Deshaun told me. He said he looks at one of his top priorities, or one of our top priorities, is to create a strategy whereby we are communicating real stuff in a 21st century way. We're doing it right now, actually, but we want to do more of this. And make sure the message isn't, make sure the message fits the cause. Um, how do we really want to see police reform? I mean, do we really want to see, um, you know, misconduct records be made at least available to defense attorneys or professionals, or some sort of entity that's not, the police investigating themselves and then leaving the results of that investigation secret, confidential? We have to, I think it's a matter of framing. But again, I'm wondering what your all experience has been, with specifically police reform, or um, any kind of issues around criminal justice reform. I wonder what your experience has been, because I know I'm talking to or looking at a group of people. If you're dialed into to listen to me talk about police reform on a Thursday, I know you guys are engaged. There's a level of engagement here that's different than, just your average person. So I'm really interested in if you guys have any thoughts about your experience, or what has worked, or just what the feeling you got when you speak to legislators or other public officials about, the police.
Okay, who wants to speak up?
Nobody likes to talk about the police. See, this could be an issue. I mean, maybe you guys, the other thing is, it's potentially, and I don't know. So I know you guys talk about all kinds of issues, housing being a big one we just mentioned, with Kim. You might not have any experience, with this, or it's not a, not a priority for you. That makes sense as well. I would say that um, it probably affects you more than you think, um, because it sort of does affect, the there's a feeling that here's another little riddle. I'll give you this, give you something to think about, and maybe this will spur some more conversation. I don't know. Pardon me.
And Roger does have his hand up, so he's
Oh,
willing to, yes.
Roger, please
interject.
go ahead, and then we'll continue. Yeah, please.
He's frozen. I'm
Oh
not sure
no.
what happened.
Oh,
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 Now he's
there we
back.
go. There we
Okay.
Oh, thank
go.
goodness he's back.
we all froze for a moment. Thankfully, contact with police has been limited to only good experiences. But I had a simple question. You mentioned earlier about body cams. And I know that nationally you see, oh, the policeman did not turn on the camera. Is that something that, in the way we have the law structured here, that little bit of information is something that would be hidden? That the policeman did, the reason there's no video of this was because the policeman did not turn on his camera, but maybe we never even get that explanation. Maybe we say there was a technical issue. We don't have anything on this. Or do we know more about that? And what can we know? And what does you say the police accountability boards don't really have any oversight except, discipline and no subpoenas and all that. But could they even find out something like that?
Well, here's what I'll say first. Um, there are departments that post their body worn camera policy, their interdepartment policy on the internet, and of the ones that we know that there's always a line in the policy about making sure it's working, having it on, that type of thing. So there's usually a policy attached to that. Now, how do we find that out? Great question. We usually don't. Um, the best example I can think of finding it out, or the best two examples, and best is a sort of an odd way to put it. Shouldn't have used that word. There was an incident in Southbridge in Wilmington a couple of years ago. A guy got following into a bodega. Cop turned him around. And once he turned around, got his hands behind his back, smashed his head against the glass thing, and pulled him out of the place, and threw him out in the street. Well, the surveillance camera inside the shop was running and got it. And that got released through media and other means, other advocacy means. So because that happened, and because of that incident, and that's how it got released, we were able to find out that Officer Samuel Waters didn't have his camera on until they got outside into the street, until basically the altercation had ended. So we found that out, and my guess is that happens more often than we know. The other sort of maybe infamous is the best way to put it, was when Lyman Moses was shot and killed by Newcastle County officers in the northeast of Wilmington. Because of the situation, I think the county executive released the dash cam and body cam video of that. But again, that was a sort of obviously an elevated special circumstance because someone was killed. But how often are we able to check to see if they're following the policy? Really can't. I know Misty, one of the things you should have asked her is her trials and tribulations about trying to get body cam footage. Defense attorneys actually can get this. So we do know that when there's a criminal trial and there's criminal action being taken in some fashion, the body cam footage will be available. But again, I also have heard things about, oh, the camera failed or it broke, or we ran out of memory, or whatever. So we are starting to get dribs and drabs of, basically through the criminal justice system, through through things going to trial and in discovery. but that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. And we're going to be actually keep watching. I just had a conversation about potentially having a night with the Newcastle County Police Accountability Board where they will talk about their body worn camera, and if you could ask questions at that. I don't think it'll be next month. It'll probably be the month after. But it is something that we're really keen on sort of getting to the bottom of how they're being used, and making sure that the public and the community knows what's supposed to be happening.
Yeah, that would help a lot if the community knows the rules and what
Yeah,
they're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
That sort of transparency really shouldn't be controversial. You'd
No, it
think.
shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Lynn,
So-
have you heard it?
Yeah. You were asking just about the involvement of this group in police reform efforts. And, if you remember last year when HB 205 and 206 were introduced, they, were introduced on a Friday afternoon, heard in committee on a Tuesday, and, it just like sailed through before there was any opportunity for the community to organize and do things. So I don't think most of this group really participated in the dialogue last year. But the session before that, the year before that, remember when SB 349 was going through, where we were trying to do some significant reform of Leobor, this group was engaged in that. Our Peace and Justice Work Group signed on as an entity. I would guess that most of the folks on this Zoom signed the Action Network letter that went to legislators, asking that those reforms be passed. Bill, I remember you helped create a video that ACLU, or the Coalition for Smart Justice, was putting together. So there was significant involvement of, people here tonight in those efforts a couple of years ago, but that ended in frustration. Remember that all that effort, there was a lot of excitement that real reform was going to happen, and then all that fell apart, and then there was all that silence, and then last year out of nowhere stuff came through and passed, and everyone was like, what happened? We weren't part of the discussion. And so, I think this group is kind of frustrated.
I not to belabor a cliche, but I feel your pain. We're all, I think I used the word failure earlier to describe sort of the result of that work, and I feel that. They did rush through these other bills that we talked about, but it was obvious what happened, because of the nature of what they contained and the manner in which they were sort of jammed. Everybody knows what that is. So to feel discouraged, or frustrated or angry, I get that. I can tell you that those feelings are widespread in the police reform advocacy community and activist community. It's one of the reasons that, I mean, it's one of the reasons that I think we all need to really sort of reflect upon, again, who's our partner, who is sort of dealing with us in good faith, as constituents or as advocates or as citizens or whatever. I think it needs a big rethink, because a lot of people from the grassroots, from small organizations, from big organizations, the ACLU, people from the community, they took one on the chin with this. And, I can echo what Lynn said. There's a lot of bad feelings about it. So, I know it's cold comfort to say that, we're all in it together. But I think the positive part of it, or the way forward, is to sort of reevaluate the way in which we approached those particular legislative efforts. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm hopefully here to do. And when I say here, with DCJ, with ODS, with the help of the community, and sort of leveraging the pressure points that we can, building our own sort of institutions up, whatever they may be. Yes, anybody jump in. Who's I have to apologize, by the way. I can't read your names. I have vision issues and I've had some medical issues, so I'm sorry about that. But whoever had their hand up, feel free.
Okay, I'm Bill Nace. I was a part of the earlier group with videos and enthusiasm and speaking to my representative and state senator and so forth, and ended up being frustrated like the rest of us. So I kind of quit on police reform and focused on some other things. But I'm wondering whether if we bit off more than we could chew several years ago in the state of Delaware, I'm wondering if there's anything that can be gleaned out of those ashes with the Newcastle County Advisory Board. I don't know anything about it. I have great respect for Kim. So if there's any hope at all of doing something good for Newcastle County, maybe we could focus on that. Is there some way to come out of the Newcastle County quote unquote advisory board or whatever it's called that could give us some hope, give us something that we have accomplished? So far, we haven't accomplished anything. It doesn't feel to me. And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I'm just wondering whether we were, the state of Delaware is not all that big, but it was too big for us for a couple of years ago, and was too big for me. I worked on my representative and I worked on my senator, and it didn't work. The system did not work. Now I'm wondering 2 or so years later, is there anything we can do by zeroing in on the Newcastle County Board and getting them more power, or getting them to work more effectively, or whatever?
I think it's a great question. First of all, again, I talk to a lot of activists and advocates and community organizers, and we all pretty much come to the same conclusion. When you're not getting any traction or any purchase in one direction, you switch priorities, because you yourself, every person only has, so much resources, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial. You only have so much. So I completely agree with that. And I think you're right. In the police reform arena, there are some pressure points we can start hitting, because hitting the legislative one, as you said, didn't work. So that's one of the lessons that I take from it, just in general. What the Newcastle County Board is going to do, they've just begun, but there is potential there, because the community is involved, because it's the way that it was set up, and because it's doing its work in public. That I think it's a way, if someone wanted to spend time on police reform because they really do think it's a priority, I think doing something like that is an excellent way. Just keeping it, and I think this is one of the reasons that we started the community working group, to sort of like talk about not only the accountability boards, but sort of other issues, because I think it's a great way to go. I will say this, to be completely candid, and this is not anybody's viewpoint, but mine. The lesson that I learned is one of the reasons that the legislative issue didn't get any traction is not necessarily because the state sort of was too big, but I think we as a group miscalculate the power of particular institutions in Delaware. And it's not just the police, just large institutions that hold a lot of power. That we see it in the corporate law sector and corporate law. And I think I think sometimes we miscalculate what we're up against. And so, we kind of I think we stepped into a trap, to be honest with you, on police reform for the last couple of years. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is strategize my way with the help of everyone in the community that I can get involved to strategize our way around those traps. And I think one of the ways to do it's not going to be the only one, and I don't know, it might not work. But one of the ways that seems like it's going to have a lot of opportunity is with the accountability boards, particularly generally, but with the Newcastle County ones particularly.
Rob,
Yes,
I think
please.
probably 4 years ago, I'd never heard of Leobor. Didn't even know what it was. But then it became a major topic. And there was a task force put together and a lot of all the work that you've described. And I recall at the time that in the whole question of police reform, there was a belief that it would be hard to implement anything substantial given the number of legislators in Delaware who have a police background. And that it was an uphill climb because of the natural resistance given that circumstance. I don't know where things stand now. I know that there are seats that have changed hands. I know there has been some concerted effort in subsequent elections to try to shift some of that balance. How significant an issue is that today?
It's still a very significant issue. I'll give away some background here, some discarded drafts. One of the things I was going to mention was that exact issue, and of course, it's not just in the legislature. It's also, there was, it's at the county level. Um, there was a new story that came out yesterday about, maybe it came out today in the Delaware State News about the cannabis legalization implementation. And of course, the administrative body that's implementing that is run by a state cop, an ex-state cop. So now what's happening is all the advocates that got that passed last year are having to fight to make sure that the way that it was passed continues the way, they had written into the law some equity and for each of the channels to get licensing for cannabis. So if you wanted to grow it, if you wanted to sell it retail, whatever, that everybody would have an opportunity to get whatever licenses there were. And then the idea was, well, no, actually, we'll give the first licenses to the people who have the medical retail licenses now, which are 2 out-of-state companies and 2 companies owned by ex-state cops. So I think it's extremely serious. Now, I will say this. One of the reasons that I didn't get my flashcards out to show individuals of who holds power and who used to be a cop was exactly what I said before, because I really tried to shy and stay away from this idea that it's about individual people, but it is about power, how power is played with the institution. Pete Schwarzkopf was a very sort of conservative, reactionary, democratic speaker. He is retiring. But his manner of managing the state house has continued. His deputy was named the speaker, and she was able to sort of keep the same sort of leadership that's there. But it does play a big part in it. I can tell you that the 2 police officers that were sort of shared that the draft bill I spoke about before about getting police misconduct records to criminal defense attorneys, the two police officers in the House, and I'll say, I mean, everybody knows who they are, Franklin Cook and Pete Schwarzkopf, said these advocates already got 95% of what they wanted last year, so we're not doing it. I mean, that's what you're up against. Now, the bright side, which you mentioned, this is starting to change. Pete Schwarzkopf has retired. Eric Morrison and Medina Wilson Anton are in the House. They defeated two long-term incumbent ex-police. So it can change. It can change at the electoral level, but the institutional power is still going to be shifted to the police, because that's just the way. I mean, I think everybody in Delaware has a pretty good, if you've been here long enough, you have a pretty good sense of what institutions I'm talking about that wield the most power, and that's one of them. And I think that, it's not only just the legislature, but it's definitely the legislature too.
Well, one of the things I think that happens, though, is as we begin to see change, meaningful change, whether it's in a particular legislator or district or whatever, it at least begins to build some sense that change is possible. And then it opens up some other avenues, because to Bill's point, if all you do is bang your head against a brick wall and go nowhere, the natural human response is to say, this hurts, I'm not doing this anymore. So where progress is made, I think building on that and using that as a springboard for more. We can't do it all at once. Got to pick one battle at a time. And so I think that's the kind of strategy that you're talking about, how to make some step change, little bit at a time. And
yeah, not even
battle.
necessarily. Yeah, not even necessarily incremental, but just strategic. Not the same thing. I will caution everyone. I think the reason that you get a little bit and not nothing is so that all of us feel like we got nothing,
Something.
but everybody else feels like we got something, which is everything, and that's it. And so that's why because if they didn't do anything, we would just have been back on them again this term about the same stuff. So they give you whatever amount, and then you do feel like you've run up against it, because there's no appetite with the policymakers to do anything, and because they just did something, but you feel completely unsatisfied because you should be. So yeah, I think, as I said before, I think it's just an idea of people sort of deciding to do it differently, deciding to use different routes, different strategies, deciding to work with different groups, and frankly, just being creative. As I said, this is one thing Deshaun was talking about: communication, independent media. One of the reasons I feel like I've been able to even get this job based on my background is that I've developed a rapport with the community based on the work that I've done. But I'm also completely independent. I don't have to worry about, I don't work at a low level state position or at a place that if somebody calls and says they don't like what I wrote, that they're going to have me fired. That happens in Delaware. I think you're all very aware of that. And so that's another way institutional pressure tamps down on activism and advocacy. So I would recommend, when you're working, look for the most independent sort of groups and independent minded people and you can, there's a level of trust there that that you're working with people that are good faith actors, and then you can strategize accordingly.
Well, and I think that our group certainly has been looking at the broad issues of criminal justice reform, not just police reform. And so we've actually been delighted to see some of the progress that's being made. I mean, Lynn has done extraordinary work with the fines and fees issues and the campaign to end debtors prison, and we are seeing real change being made. And I think holding out that carrot is important. It's helpful to know and to see that as a result of thoughtful, coordinated, well-organized, well-managed effort, change can occur. And I think that helps us get over some of the hurdles when something crashes and burns, which inevitably it will do. We are coming to the end of our time, but Lynn has her hand up, so we are.
So Lynn, you keep bouncing around
Hear
my
from
screen, so I
Lynn.
can't
Yeah.
I can't see it,
Right,
but I
right.
do see your hand up. Lynn gets the last word, which I think is perfectly fair.
Well, I was just gonna end this with a positive story and a funny one about fines and fees. And you know, for Miriam's talk a few weeks ago, that we had initially 3 fee elimination bills that were being introduced first on the Senate side. And the way it ended up, you know, once you get a good thing going, it turns out everyone wants to be part of it. I don't know how often this happens, but on the Senate floor, it became so popular that every single senator on both sides of the aisle asked to be added as co-sponsors to those bills before they were voted on.
Wow.
Which is just, you know, I don't think that kind of thing happens that often, but once it becomes a popular thing and it starts going that direction, no one wants to be left behind. You know, it started out with a hand here and a hand there, and, you know, pretty soon, you know, they just said, okay, you know, anyone else who wants to be added, put up your hand and let's just do it all at once. And everyone just, you know, put their hand up and there they had it. So you know, positive things can happen once you educate people about the need. And, you know, it's taken, you know, 5 years of this campaign to get things going, but, you know, we kind of have a system that's working now.
Yeah, and I will say just as to close, thank you again for inviting me. I was so glad. I had a feeling at some point this would turn into a great discussion. So I just want to thank everybody again for hosting. And I think it is important to mention that Lynn is exactly right. Usually these wins come, you know, they don't come often, but they usually come by surprise because you reach a you know, a tipping point where it was like 50-50, could go either way. And then all of a sudden a few things break and everybody's on board again because nobody wants to be left off everybody wants to be on the platform for the big win. So yeah, it might feel like the end is never coming. But actually when it does happen, it happens pretty quick.
Well, thank you for being here, Rob, and thank you for taking on that position. You've only been in it for 5 months, so we're interested to see what will happen as time goes on. And this group will pay attention, and we're connected with DCJ and a lot of the kinds of initiatives that you personally or your position is involved in. We will look forward to having Kim Eppiheimer and Kaylin Richards come and talk with us at the end of June or into July. And to Bill's point about how we might take what's happening there and make it a model or at least a communications vehicle for what might be possible. So progress can be made. I will let you know that next week the Middle East Task Force is going to host our program, and it actually brings together the Matthew 25 concept for Presbyterian churches and work being done in the Middle East. Mark Mosher and Carol Mosher will be the hosts for our program next week. Following that, we're going to have a program on the history and the significance of Juneteenth. And then Mike Ganade is involved in putting together a couple of opportunities for us to become actively involved in Juneteenth celebrations in the community. One is sponsored by YWCA Delaware, and the other actually by a Juneteenth organization. So please pay attention to that. And I guess the final comment I would make is that the Episcopal Church in Delaware and Newcastle Presbytery have been working very hard at putting together what promises to be an absolutely outstanding pilgrimage to Montgomery and Selma, Alabama. And there is an application form if you would be interested in applying for that, and certainly some background information on the nature of the journey, what it hopes to accomplish. I'm speaking personally, I've not been to Selma, but I did go to Montgomery earlier this year, and it's powerful. And the work that's been done to put together this collaboration between the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church promises to be, I think, a life-changing experience for the people who do that. Mike and his wife, Shelley, will be participating in that. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. But I would ask you to consider that as something that promises to be really significant.
I think applications are due tomorrow, so. if you have
They've extended it.
Oh,
They
good.
have extended it. Yes, yes. So you have more than an hour and a half to, yeah, to figure that out. Yes, yes. So, yeah, thank you for raising that. The documentation says May 31st, but it's moving into June. And it should be just an amazing experience. If you would like some additional information, shoot me an email. And I will get that information out to the broader Thursday evening Peace and Justice Work Group participants, just so everybody has ready access to that. All right. Well, have a wonderful week, you all. This weather could continue forever, as far as I'm concerned. I know it won't, but enjoy every moment, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again, Rob.
Thank you.